My name is Arlene. I'm 34 years old, and I'm standing in a courthouse bathroom trying to stop my hands from shaking. Through the thin walls, I can hear my husband Mark and his mistress Jessica laughing in the hallway. They think they've already won. They think taking everything from me is some kind of game. But they don't know what's about to happen in that courtroom. They don't know what the judge discovered during recess. Before I share what happened in that courtroom, tell me where you're watching from today. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, please hit that subscribe button and like this video because what the judge said next changed not just my case, but my entire understanding of justice. For 12 years, Mark and I lived what looked like the perfect life in suburban Connecticut. Our colonial home sat on 2 acres of manicured lawn, complete with the white picket fence I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl. Mark worked as an investment banker at one of those firms with names that sound like law partnerships, while I ran my graphic design business from our converted guest house. To everyone looking in, we had made it. The changes started so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. First came the late meetings that stretched from once a week to almost every night. Then the new gym membership, though Mark had never shown interest in fitness during our entire marriage. He became protective of his phone, taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I'd walk into a room while he was texting, he'd quickly flip the screen down. His colleague Jessica entered our lives at the company Christmas party 8 months ago. She was 26, fresh out of Columbia, with an MBA working in the mergers and acquisitions department where Mark had recently been promoted to senior director. I remember standing by the chocolate fountain watching her touch his arm while laughing at something he said. The gesture seemed too familiar, too comfortable for new colleagues. "She's brilliant," Mark told me on the drive home that night. "Reminds me of myself at that age, hungry and ready to conquer the world." I pushed down the unease settling in my stomach. This was just professional admiration, I told myself. Mark had always been a mentor to younger employees, but the distance between us grew wider with each passing week. When I suggested date nights, he claimed exhaustion from a major acquisition deal. When I surprised him with tickets to see his favorite band, he said he couldn't commit to plans that far in advance. Our weekend getaways, once a monthly tradition, became ancient history. My best friend Laura tried to warn me. She'd gone through her own divorce 2 years earlier and recognized the signs I was desperately trying to ignore. "Arlene, when did Mark last ask about your design projects?" she asked over coffee one afternoon. I couldn't remember. When had he stopped asking about my day, stopped sharing his own without prompting? "We're just going through a rough patch," I insisted. "Every marriage has them." Laura stirred her latte thoughtfully. "Maybe. But rough patches don't usually involve new cologne and working out 5 times a week." I convinced Mark to try couples counseling, selling it as a way to strengthen our already good marriage. He attended exactly 2 sessions before declaring that Dr. Patel was biased against successful men, and that therapy was for people with real problems, not busy professionals going through career transitions. Looking back, I see how masterfully he gaslit me. Every concern I raised got flipped into evidence of my insecurity, my inability to understand the demands of his career, my failure to grow alongside him. He painted himself as the victim of a wife who couldn't appreciate his success. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was too focused on my small business. Maybe I had become the boring suburban wife he never wanted. I threw myself into self-improvement, reading relationship books, trying new recipes, updating my wardrobe. Nothing bridged the growing canyon between us. The loneliest part was sleeping next to someone who felt like a stranger. Mark would lie with his back to me, phone glowing in the darkness as he typed message after message. When I asked who he was texting so late, he'd mutter something about Asian markets and time zones. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to him breathe, remembering when that sound used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me that the person next to me had become someone I no longer recognized. The man who once left love notes in my lunch bag now couldn't be bothered to say good morning. The partner who'd held my hand through my mother's death now treated me like an inconvenient roommate. Everything shattered on a Tuesday morning in March. Mark had left for an early flight to Boston, or so he said. forgetting his iPad on the kitchen counter. I was carrying it to his home office when an email notification popped up. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for round 2 at the cabin this weekend. Jay. My hands went numb. Our family cabin in the Berkshires, the place where we'd spent our honeymoon, where we'd talked about raising children, was apparently now their love nest. I sat down at his desk iPad, trembling in my hands, and did what any wife would do. I looked. 6 months of emails unfolded before me, each one another knife to my heart. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future. Jessica had sent him real estate listings for condos downtown. He'd responded with enthusiasm about starting fresh, about finally being with someone who understood his ambitions. The photos were what broke me. Selfies from our cabin, Jessica wearing the robe I'd left there, Mark looking happier than I'd seen him in years. Pictures from restaurants where he'd told me he was entertaining clients. A shot from the hotel in Miami, where he'd supposedly attended a conference alone last month. But the financial betrayal cut even deeper. Hidden in his filing cabinet, I found credit card statements for an account I didn't know existed. Thousands of dollars spent on jewelry that I'd never received, hotel rooms charged while he was supposedly working late, designer goods shipped to an address downtown that I would later learn was Jessica's apartment. When Mark returned that evening, I was sitting in the living room with printed copies of everything spread across our coffee table. He walked in, saw the papers, and his face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and finally cold indifference. "So you went through my things," he said, as if I was the one who'd betrayed our vows. "You're having an affair," I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch from the bar we'd bought together on our anniversary trip to Scotland. "I'm in love with Jessica," he said simply. "This marriage has been over for years, Arlene. We were just too comfortable to admit it." "Comfortable?" I stood up, anger finally breaking through the shock. "I've spent the last year trying to save us while you were sleeping with a woman 8 years younger than me." His laugh was cruel, nothing like the warm sound I'd fallen in love with. "Jessica understands ambition. She's not content with suburban mediocrity. While you're playing with your little design projects, she's helping me build an empire. My little design projects that helped pay for this house. My bonuses paid for this house," he snapped. "Your hobby money barely covered groceries." That was a lie, and we both knew it. My business had grown steadily over the years, contributing 40% of our household income. But Mark had always minimized my success, treating it like a cute side project rather than the legitimate business it was. "I want a divorce," I said. "Good. Jessica and I have been waiting for you to catch up." He finished his drink and set down the glass with deliberate calm. "I'll be generous. You can have the car and some of the furniture. But the house is mine. I need it for when my children visit." "Your children." "Jessica's pregnant," he said, watching my face for a reaction. 3 months along. We're building a real family, Arlene. Something you never wanted to give me." Another lie. We'd tried for 5 years to have children, enduring 3 miscarriages that had nearly destroyed me. Mark had been the one to suggest we stop trying, saying he was content with just us. Now I understood why he'd been so quick to give up. He moved out that night, heading straight to Jessica's downtown apartment. But not before delivering one final blow. "Everyone already knows," he said from the doorway. "The Petersons, the Changs, even your precious Laura. We've been out together as a couple for months. They all chose to protect you from the truth because, honestly, Arlene, it's a bit pathetic how oblivious you've been." After he left, I called Laura, who rushed over to find me collapsed on the bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. She held me while I shook, then helped me to bed, where I stayed for 3 days, unable to process the complete destruction of my life. "You need to fight back," Laura said on day 4, pulling open the curtains I'd drawn against the world. "Mark thinks he's won, but he's underestimated you. He always has." She was right. Mark had counted on me crumbling on me, accepting whatever scraps he threw my way just to make the pain stop. But underneath the grief, a different emotion was building. Rage. Clean, purposeful rage that would carry me through the battle ahead. Laura connected me with Catherine Brennan, a divorce attorney with a reputation for taking down arrogant husbands who thought their wives were too weak to fight back. Catherine's office occupied the top floor of a Hartford high-rise, all sharp angles and power furniture that announced she didn't lose cases. "Your husband made several critical mistakes," Catherine said after reviewing my documentation. "First, hiding assets during a marriage is fraud. Second, using marital property for an affair constitutes dissipation of assets. Third, and this is interesting, Connecticut is an at-fault state, meaning his adultery actually matters." She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "Tell me about Jessica. Everything you know." I shared what I'd learned through my own investigation. Jessica Coleman came from money her family owning an import-export business that operated primarily in Southeast Asia. She joined Mark's firm straight from Colombia, specifically requesting placement in his department. According to LinkedIn, she'd had offers from 3 other banks, but chose this one. "That's not random," Catherine muttered, typing rapidly on her laptop. "I want to run a deeper background check." Over the next weeks, Catherine's team uncovered a web of financial deception that stunned even her. Mark hadn't just hidden money. He'd been systematically moving assets offshore for 8 months, well before I discovered the affair. Jessica's family business provided the perfect cover, with funds flowing through their accounts before disappearing into Caribbean banks. "We're talking about $800,000, Catherine said, sliding documents across her desk. "Your husband has been planning this for almost a year." The forensic accountant Catherine hired found more. Mark had been slowly devaluing my business on paper, claiming losses that didn't exist, preparing to argue I was financially dependent on him. Meanwhile, he'd inflated his own income through bonuses he'd hidden in deferred compensation packages. "This is sophisticated fraud," the accountant told us. "Someone with financial expertise helped structure this." We knew who that someone was. Mark hired Richard Steinberg as his attorney, a man known for brutal tactics and a willingness to destroy wives who dared challenge powerful husbands. Our first meeting with opposing counsel set the tone for everything that followed. "My client is prepared to be generous," Steinberg said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Mrs. Harrison can keep her personal belongings and her little craft business. In exchange, she'll walk away from any claim to the house investments and retirement accounts." "Your client committed fraud," Catherine responded coolly. "We have documentation of hidden assets and marital waste." "Alleged documentation," Steinberg corrected. "My client's financial decisions were all legal business investments. As for the affair, that's irrelevant. Ms. Coleman and Mr. Harrison fell in love. These things happen." During depositions, Mark and Jessica coordinated their stories perfectly. Too perfectly. They claimed their relationship began only after our marriage was essentially over, that I'd been emotionally absent for years, focused only on my failing business, while Mark built a fortune I'd contributed nothing toward. Jessica's deposition was particularly galling. She painted herself as an innocent who'd fallen for a man she believed was already separated, claiming I was the one prolonging a dead marriage out of spite and greed. She actually teared up when describing how difficult it was to be pregnant while dealing with my vindictiveness. "We just want to move forward with our lives," she said, hand on her visible baby bump. "Arlene needs to accept that Mark chose happiness over obligation." But Catherine had been building our case methodically. Every financial record, every email, every credit card charge painted a picture of deliberate deception and fraud. My business records proved steady growth and significant contribution to household expenses. Character witnesses described a devoted wife trying desperately to save her marriage while Mark played house with his mistress. "They're getting cocky," Catherine observed after a particularly contentious pretrial hearing. "Good. Arrogant people make mistakes." She was right. In their confidence, Mark and Jessica had grown careless. They showed up to meetings together, unable to keep their hands off each other, Jessica wearing jewelry I recognized from the hidden credit card statements. They whispered and laughed during proceedings, treating the dissolution of my 12-year marriage like entertainment. Dr. Martinez, the therapist Laura had insisted I see, helped me prepare emotionally for what was coming. They want you to react, she said. Your anger, your tears, they'll use it all against you. Your power comes from staying calm, from letting their behavior speak for itself. My sister flew in from Seattle the week before trial, moving into the guest room to provide support. My small army, Laura, my sister Kate Catherine, and Dr. Martinez became the foundation that kept me standing when everything in me wanted to collapse. You're going to walk into that courtroom with your head high, Kate said the night before trial. You're going to show them that Arlene Harrison doesn't break. She bends, she strategizes, and then she wins. The morning of trial arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I dressed in the navy suit Catherine had approved as professional, but not trying too hard. My hands shook as I applied lipstick the same shade I'd worn on my wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on me. I arrived at the courthouse early, needing time to center myself before facing them. But as I walked toward the courtroom, I saw them getting out of Mark's BMW. Jessica wore a cream-colored dress that emphasized her pregnancy, her hand possessively on Mark's arm. But what made my blood run cold was the antique brooch pinned to her collar. My grandmother's brooch, the one Mark had sworn he'd lost last year. They saw me, and Jessica actually smiled a triumphant little smirk that said she'd already won. Mark looked through me like I was invisible, just another stranger in the courthouse hallway. They walked past me, Jessica's perfume, the same scent I used to wear, trailing behind them like a taunt. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, which made sitting across from them even harder. Judge Margaret Thornton presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for seeing through lies. Catherine had said we were lucky to draw her, though I didn't feel lucky about anything. Steinberg's opening statement painted me as the bitter ex-wife unable to accept that love had simply died. He described Mark as a successful man who'd tried everything to save a marriage to a woman who'd stopped growing, stopped dreaming, stopped being the partner he'd needed. My client's only crime, Steinberg said, was falling in love with someone who shared his vision for the future. Catherine's opening was surgical in its precision. She laid out the financial fraud, the calculated deception, the systematic destruction of a marriage for monetary gain. She painted Mark not as a man who'd fallen in love, but as someone who'd methodically plotted to leave his wife with nothing while building a new life on stolen assets. Mark testified first, his banking background serving him well, as he presented polished half-truths. He spoke eloquently about growing apart, about trying to make things work with someone who couldn't understand the demands of his career. When asked about the hidden money, he claimed it was all legitimate investment strategy, diversifying portfolios in volatile markets. I always intended to share any profits with Arlene, he lied smoothly. The offshore accounts were just temporary vehicles for complex transactions. Jessica's testimony was even more polished. She presented herself as a successful woman who'd found unexpected love with a colleague she'd admired professionally. She claimed shock at learning Mark was still technically married when they began their relationship, though she'd believed the marriage was over in all but paperwork. Arlene seems like a lovely person, Jessica said, managing to sound both condescending and false. I hope someday she'll find the happiness Mark and I have found together. During the lunch recess, I escaped to the bathroom to compose myself. That's when I heard them in the hallway, their voices carrying through the thin walls. God, did you see her face when she saw the brooch? Jessica laughed. Priceless. I told you wearing it would get to her. Steinberg says we've got this locked up, Mark replied. Her pathetic lawyer doesn't have anything solid on the offshore accounts. Poor Arlene, Jessica's voice dripped mockery, still thinking her little design business means something. When we get the house, I'm turning that guest office into a proper nursery. They laughed together, the sound echoing off the courthouse walls. Something inside me hardened into steel. Catherine found me minutes later, standing at the sink, staring at my reflection. You okay? They're laughing at me, I said quietly. They think they've won. Good. Catherine smiled. Let them think that. My testimony that afternoon was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I sat in that witness box, looking at the man I'd loved for 12 years, and told the truth. Not the emotional truth of betrayal and heartbreak, but the factual truth of financial contributions, of building a life together, of being systematically erased from my own existence. Steinberg's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned every financial decision I'd made, every client I'd lost, every time I'd prioritized my marriage over my business. He tried to paint me as a failure clinging to a successful man's achievements. Isn't it true that your business operated at a loss for 3 years? It's true that I showed paper losses while reinvesting profits for growth, a standard business practice. But you're not really a businesswoman, are you? You're a homemaker who does some design work on the side. I'm a professional graphic designer with 18 corporate clients and annual revenues of $200,000. Catherine's evidence presentation was methodical. Financial records, bank statements, emails, credit card charges, each piece building an undeniable picture of fraud. But the real surprise came when she called Patricia Morse to the stand. Patricia had been Mark's administrative assistant for 5 years before leaving the company 6 months ago. I hadn't known Catherine had found her. "Ms. Morse," Catherine began, "can you tell us about Mr. Harrison's relationship with Ms. Coleman?" Patricia, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steel-gray hair, looked directly at Mark as she spoke. "Their affair began 2 years ago, not 6 months as they've claimed. I know because I was asked to book their hotel rooms and create false calendar entries." The courtroom stirred. Judge Thornton leaned forward. 2 years ago? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Harrison was very specific about keeping things hidden. But that wasn't the first time. There was another woman before Ms. Coleman, Andrea, from accounting. She was transferred to the London office when things ended badly. This was news even to me. Jessica's face had gone pale, her hand gripping Mark's arm. "Were you aware of any financial irregularities?" Mr. Harrison had me set up several bank accounts using variations of his name. He said it was for international business, but the transfers always happened right before his trips with Ms. Coleman. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I needed my job. I'm a single mother with 2 kids in college. When I finally couldn't stomach it anymore, I quit. But when Ms. Brennan contacted me, I knew I had to tell the truth." She turned to me. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison. You were always so kind when you'd visit the office. You deserved better." The revelation about Mark's previous affair sent ripples through the courtroom. Jessica was no longer looking triumphant. She was staring at Mark with something like dawning horror. But Patricia wasn't finished. "There's something else," she said. "I recognized Ms. Coleman's name when she joined the firm. My friend at Goldman Sachs mentioned her. She'd been involved in a similar situation there with a married partner. That's why she really left, not for a better opportunity." Judge Thornton called for an unexpected recess after Patricia's testimony. The 30 minutes that followed felt like hours. Mark and Jessica huddled with Steinberg in a corner, their whispered conversation growing increasingly heated. Jessica kept shaking her head, gesturing wildly while Mark tried to calm her. When court reconvened, Judge Thornton's expression was grave. She'd removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly before speaking. "I've been a family court judge for 20 years, she began. "I've seen every kind of marital dissolution imaginable. But fraud, deliberate financial fraud designed to leave a spouse destitute, that's something I take very seriously." She put her glasses back on, studying the courtroom. "During the recess, I did something unusual. Ms. Coleman's name seemed familiar, so I checked my records." Jessica went rigid in her seat. 3 years ago, in my previous jurisdiction, I presided over Thompson versus Thompson. The defendant's mistress in that case was a Jessica Coleman, recently graduated from Columbia. That case also involved hidden assets, offshore accounts, and a pregnant mistress. The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. "Ms. Coleman," Judge Thornton addressed Jessica directly, "you seem to have a pattern, a very specific, very troubling pattern." Jessica started to speak, but Steinberg grabbed her arm, shaking his head. "Your Honor," Steinberg began, but Judge Thornton cut him off. "I'm not finished, Counselor. During the recess, I also contacted the state attorney's office. It seems Ms. Coleman is already under investigation for her role in financial fraud at her previous firm. The Goldman Sachs situation Ms. Morse mentioned, it resulted in SEC inquiries that are still ongoing. Mark turned to Jessica, his face a mix of shock and rage. What is she talking about? Jessica pulled away from him, tears streaming down her face. It's not what you think. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, the pattern of offshore transfers through Ms. Coleman's family business raises serious questions about money laundering and tax evasion. This court has an obligation to report suspected criminal activity to appropriate authorities. Catherine stood. Your Honor, we'd like to submit additional evidence regarding the scope of financial fraud in this case. I'll allow it. The documents Catherine presented were damning. Not only had Mark hidden $800,000, but the forensic accountant had found evidence that Jessica had been moving money for other executives at the firm using the same offshore structure. Mark wasn't her only target. He was just the latest. Your Honor, Catherine said, we believe Ms. Coleman specifically targeted married executives, facilitated the hiding of assets, and profited from the destruction of marriages. Mark stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. You knew, he stared at Jessica. This whole time you were using me. Sit down, Mr. Harrison, Judge Thornton commanded. Your outrage is noted but irrelevant. You chose to commit fraud against your wife. Whether Ms. Coleman enabled or encouraged that fraud doesn't absolve you of responsibility. She shuffled through the papers before her. I'm ready to rule. My hands gripped the table so hard my knuckles turned white. Catherine placed a steadying hand over mine. On the matter of asset division, Judge Thornton began, given the evidence of deliberate fraud, I'm ordering all hidden assets returned to the marital estate immediately. The full $800,000 will be considered when dividing property. She looked directly at Mark. Mr. Harrison, your attempt to hide assets shows bad faith that this court cannot ignore. Therefore, I'm awarding the family home to Mrs. Harrison along with 60% of all remaining marital assets. Mark's face went red. Your Honor, that's excessive. I'm not finished. You'll also pay Mrs. Harrison's legal fees as your fraudulent behavior necessitated extensive forensic accounting. Additionally, given the length of the marriage and the deliberate financial harm attempted, you'll pay alimony of $5,000 monthly for 10 years. This is ridiculous, Mark exploded. She has her own business. A business you tried to devalue and destroy. A business that, according to evidence presented, contributes significant household income despite your claims otherwise. Judge Thornton's voice was ice. Your attempt to leave your wife destitute while building a new life with hidden assets is exactly the kind of behavior alimony is designed to address. She turned to Jessica. Ms. Coleman, while you're not a party to this divorce, your involvement in financial fraud cannot be ignored. I'm forwarding all evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. I strongly suggest you obtain criminal defense counsel immediately. Jessica collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Mark stepped away from her, his movement sharp and dismissive. The woman he'd destroyed his marriage for was suddenly a liability. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, I'm recommending the state attorney investigate whether this constitutes a pattern of criminal fraud. The evidence suggests Ms. Coleman has done this before targeting married executives and profiting from marital dissolution. She banged her gavel. This divorce is granted. Mr. Harrison, you have 30 days to transfer the assets as ordered. Any delay will result in contempt charges. The courtroom erupted. Mark was shouting at Jessica, calling her a con artist, accusing her of ruining his life. Jessica was crying, insisting she loved him, that the baby was real, that everything else was a misunderstanding. You told me she was nothing, Jessica screamed at Mark. You said your marriage was over, that she was pathetic, boring. You pursued me. You targeted me, Mark shot back. You're a professional homewrecker. Steinberg tried to control his clients, but the damage was done. Their perfect alliance was crumbling in real time, their true natures exposed for everyone to see. I stood quietly while chaos swirled around me. Catherine squeezed my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You won." But I wasn't looking at Mark or Jessica. I was looking at Judge Thornton, who gave me the slightest nod. She'd seen through their lies, seen through their cruelty, and delivered justice with surgical precision. As security moved in to separate Mark and Jessica, I walked out of the courtroom with my head high, just as Kate had told me to. Behind me, I could hear Mark still shouting, Jessica still crying, their empire of lies collapsing into dust. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Word of potential criminal charges had leaked, and the story of a mistress serially targeting executives was too juicy to ignore. Catherine shepherded me through them, declining comment while cameras flashed. In the parking lot, we encountered Mark and Jessica in a vicious argument beside his BMW. She was gesturing wildly, mascara streaming down her face, while he stood with his arms crossed, cold and dismissive. "You destroyed everything," he told her. "My career, my reputation, everything." "I loved you," she sobbed. "This isn't what was supposed to happen." "Love," Mark laughed bitterly. "You're a criminal, and now you're carrying a criminal's baby." Security intervened when Jessica tried to slap him. As they separated them, Mark looked over and saw me watching. For a moment, our eyes met. In his, I saw not remorse but rage, as if this was somehow my fault for not quietly disappearing. Catherine drove me to the restaurant where Laura and Kate were waiting. They'd already ordered champagne, but I could barely take a sip. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. "You did it," Laura kept saying. "You fought back and won." But I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. 12 years of my life had just been ruled on, divided up, dissolved. The man I'd loved was revealed as someone capable of cruelty I'd never imagined. And somewhere out there, a pregnant woman was facing criminal charges for helping destroy my marriage. The next morning brought a media storm. The story made the financial press because of Mark's firm, the local news because of the scandal, and social media because everyone loves a story about karma. My phone rang nonstop with reporters, friends, and numbers I didn't recognize. But the call that surprised me most came from Mark. "We need to talk," he said, his voice different, smaller somehow. "Our lawyers can handle everything." "Jessica's been arrested. Did you know that would happen?" I knew she'd committed fraud. The rest was the judge's decision. "She's saying I knew everything, that I was part of the criminal conspiracy. They're investigating me now. The firm suspended me pending review." I said nothing. His problems were no longer my concern. "Arlene, please. Can't you tell them I was just having an affair, that I didn't know about her past? But you did know about the fraud against me. You participated in it." That was different. That was just divorce strategy. The delusion in his voice was stunning. Even now, he couldn't see what he'd done as wrong. "Goodbye, Mark." Over the following days, the truth kept unraveling. 3 other executives at Mark's firm came forward admitting Jessica had helped them hide assets during their divorces. The FBI opened an investigation into the offshore accounts. Jessica's family's business was raided. Mark's mother called me crying. "I never liked that girl," she said. "Something about her felt off. Oh, Arlene, I'm so sorry. My son is an idiot." I'd always loved Dorothy. She'd been more of a mother to me than my own. "You're not responsible for his choices," I told her. "Can we still have lunch sometimes? You're the daughter I never had." I'd like that. The social aftermath was almost harder than the legal battle. Friends who'd known about the affair reached out with apologies and explanations. The Petersons admitted they'd been uncomfortable, but didn't know how to tell me. The Chang said Mark had threatened to destroy their restaurant's credit if they warned me. Only Laura had tried in her way to prepare me. My business surprisingly exploded. 3 high-profile clients reached out, having heard about my story, wanting to support a woman entrepreneur who'd been wronged. Patricia, Mark's former assistant, called with a proposal to become my business manager. She had connections and experience I needed. "You gave me courage to speak up," she said. "Let me help you build something amazing." Within a month, I'd hired 2 junior designers and moved the business out of the guest house into actual office space downtown. The irony of succeeding beyond Mark's dismissive projections wasn't lost on me. Jessica's situation deteriorated rapidly. Her arrest made headlines, the pregnancy adding a tabloid element that kept the story alive. She was released on bail, but her assets were frozen. The last I heard, she was living with her parents fighting charges that could mean serious prison time. Mark's downfall was quieter but complete. The firm fired him for cause, meaning no severance, no bonuses, nothing. His reputation in banking was destroyed. The IRS opened an audit. His lawyer bills mounted as he fought both criminal investigation and Jessica's attempts to claim child support. 6 months after the divorce, I was finally sleeping through the night without nightmares. Martinez had helped me process not just the betrayal, but the years of subtle emotional abuse I'd endured. He diminished you systematically, she explained, made you doubt your worth so you'd accept whatever he gave you. Classic narcissistic abuse. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong, others I grieved the marriage I thought I'd had. But gradually, the good days outnumbered the bad. Now, a year later, my life looks nothing like I'd imagined. The house Mark fought to keep is mine, transformed from a monument to our failed marriage into a space that feels truly like home. My business occupies a floor of a downtown building with 12 employees and clients across the country. Patricia and I became not just business partners but close friends. Mark lives in a studio apartment working as a consultant when he can find clients willing to overlook his reputation. The criminal charges were dropped for lack of direct evidence, but the damage was done. He pays his alimony on time, the one thing his lawyer insisted on to avoid further legal troubles. Jessica had her baby, a boy, and immediately filed for child support. The last update from mutual acquaintances was that she'd pled guilty to reduced charges, receiving probation and community service rather than jail time because of the baby. Her career in finance is over. Mark fights her constantly over custody and support, their war playing out in family court. Sometimes I think about the woman I was that morning in the courthouse bathroom, shaking with fear while they laughed at me. She didn't know her own strength yet. She didn't know that sometimes destruction is just the prelude to construction. My company recently landed a contract to redesign the visual brand for a nonprofit supporting women after divorce. During the presentation, I found myself sharing my story. The room full of successful women nodded knowingly. We were a club none of us had chosen to join. Dorothy and I have lunch monthly. She tells me about her book club, and I update her on the business. We don't talk about Mark unless she brings him up, which happens less and less. She's grieving too, the loss of the son she thought she'd raised. I'm dating again cautiously. Thomas is a widower I met through a professional networking event. He's kind and patient, understanding that trust comes slowly now. We take walks and discuss books, and he's never once called my business a hobby. The cabin in the Berkshires has been transformed into a retreat space. Once a month I host weekend workshops for women rebuilding after divorce. We share stories and strategies, tears and triumphs. The place Mark and Jessica contaminated has become a sanctuary for healing. Catherine and I stay in touch. She sends me clients sometimes, women who need to know survival is possible. She tells me my case changed how she approaches divorce, that she now looks harder for patterns like Jessica's. You taught me that sometimes the mistress is more than just a mistress, she said. Sometimes she's a predator. I learned that when someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. Mark showed me with every late night, every dismissive comment about my work, every lie about where he'd been. I just wasn't ready to see it. But more importantly, I learned that sometimes what looks like your life falling apart is actually your life falling into place. The judge didn't just see through their lies that day. She held up a mirror that showed them who they really were. And in that same moment, she showed me who I had always been, stronger than I knew, worthy of respect, and capable of rebuilding something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The laughter that once wounded me became the echo of their own downfall. Every morning now, I wake up in the house they tried to take, run the business they called a hobby, and live the life they said I didn't deserve. Not out of revenge, but out of truth. Because when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't whisper. It roars. And that roar, the sound of justice being served in a small courtroom, while two liars' empire collapsed, that sound will stay with me forever. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well, succeeding greatly, and letting karma handle the rest. Mark and Jessica thought they'd won when they laughed at me in that courtroom. They thought they'd broken me. They thought wrong. The judge saw through their performance, saw the fraud beneath the facade, and spoke the words that changed everything. Not just legal words about assets and alimony, but truth words that exposed them for what they were: a narcissist and a predator who'd found each other and destroyed themselves in the process. My story isn't unique. Thousands of women face this betrayal, this systematic destruction of their lives, by men who promise to love them. But we survive. We rebuild. We rise. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to watch our betrayers' empires burn while we stand in the ashes reborn. If you've experienced betrayal like this, I want you to know something: their laughter doesn't define your worth. Their cruelty doesn't diminish your value. You are stronger than you know, and justice, real justice, has a way of finding those who think they're above it. Trust the process. Trust the truth. And never ever let them see you break. Because the best revenge is a life well lived, and I'm living proof of that. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where someone's cruelty became their own downfall? Share your story in the comments below, because we're stronger when we stand together. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over betrayal. Share this with someone who needs to hear that justice exists, that karma is real, and that sometimes the judge sees everything. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the strength to face your battles and the wisdom to know that sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining everything that matters.